Hello mortals, I am the BookTube Goddess, the #1 drag queen booktuber on YouTube. I grew up on Star Trek, the first, the original, the only, well not the only, but it is the archetype on which all Star Trek derivations have come from. Now it's referred to as TOS, or the original series, though it is what pops into my mind when someone mentions Star Trek. And in case you are not clear, it is the version with Captain Kirk, Mr. Spock, Bones, Scotty, Uhura, Sulu, Chekhov, and Nurse Chapel. And I'm sorry, but Kirk is the greatest captain of all the Star Trek episodes. And I know the actor William Shatner is a huge ham, but there's something about his rendition of Captain Kirk that fills me with joy. And yes, I admit that Captain Picard has a bit more gravitas, but if you've ever seen the movie Generations when Picard meets Kirk, I'm sorry, but Kirk eats the scenery whenever he is on screen. The first episode aired in 1966 and it ran for 3 years for a total of 79 episodes. I cannot even begin to count the number of times I've watched these episodes. But as a kid, when a rerun came on, I would have to watch it. It was a rule. And Star Trek ran in reruns for a very long time. Anyway, recently I was bored and watched a Star Trek episode for nostalgia's sake, and mind you, it's been a long time since I actually had seen any of the original episodes, and I found myself binging the entire series. Yes, I did. And since I love talking about Star Trek, I wondered, how can I make a video for my YouTube channel, since this channel is mostly about books? And ironically, I don't read that many Star Trek novels. I think the last one I read was Spock's World. Yeah, Spock's World by Diane Duane. But I would rather talk about the series. So as I was watching, I was Googling info on each episode, and then I was like, hey, why don't I do a YouTube series on the writers of the original Star Trek? And a few of them were or have become well-known authors. And so for this first episode, we are going to look at the writer who came up with a lot of the story ideas, but who was also the creative genius behind the series, Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry was born in 1921 in El Paso, Texas. He developed the idea for Star Trek in 1965 when he was 44 years old. The series was developed by Desilu Studios, which was headed by Lucille Ball. And you may only know Lucy as that crazy red-headed screwball, but the woman behind the character was a tough, chain-smoking, intelligent, and by all accounts very serious executive. Nothing like the crazy Lucy she played. Now, after she divorced her husband, Desi Arnaz, or you may know him as Ricky Ricardo, she took control of the studio they jointly founded, Desilu, and she was the sole owner, the president, the chief executive officer, and she was frankly the most powerful woman in Hollywood at the time, and maybe any time since. And mind you, this was in the 1960s. I read an anecdote in a Lucille Ball biography of an alleged early board meeting that Gene Roddenberry attended, where Lucy had no idea what Star Trek was about and thought Star Trek was a pitch for a television show about movie stars traveling the world, and she went on and on about which stars they could book, Tallulah Bankhead, John Wayne, Ethel Merman, and on she went, and everyone in the boardroom was so scared of Lucy that they didn't interrupt her. But when she stopped, it was up to Gene Roddenberry to say, excuse me, Miss Ball, but this is a science fiction show, sort of like a space western. And Lucy was like, well, why the hell didn't anyone stop me from talking? Okay, Gene Roddenberry was a visionary. He imagined a future where all races and nationalities worked together. And in Star Trek, the Federation embodied that ideal. Thus, the stories he came up with were somewhat idealistic. Now, when I say he came up with the stories, I don't necessarily mean he wrote the scripts on his own. A lot of the times, the teleplays were written or co-written by someone else, but that gets confusing, so I'm just going to focus in this YouTube series on who came up with the stories, who's credited as the writer. And Roddenberry is credited with 10 episodes, and in 2 of the 10 episodes, he was listed as the co-creator of the story. And the first episode we're going to talk about is The Cage, which was originally meant to be the pilot and was retitled The Menagerie and split into 2 parts. But his initial vision for Star Trek had a female first officer who was played by Majel Barrett, who would later play Nurse Chapel, and she also voiced the computer for most of the history of Star Trek. And for those who are Next Generation fans, she also played Lwaxana Troi, Deanna Troi's mother. She also later married Gene Roddenberry in 1969. Anyway, The Menagerie is about powerful aliens who can create illusions, even making illusions of health for those with life-altering injuries. When the original pilot was shown to studio executives, it was found to be too cerebral and too intellectual. And the idea of a woman as a first officer did not go down well. In fact, the only character they kept was Mr. Spock. And the footage from the original pilot, as I said, was repurposed into a 2-part series. It was cut up, and it's now known as The Menagerie. And it's kind of weird watching this early version of Spock, since Leonard Nimoy played it more emotional, and he wasn't sort of the Vulcan that the character we now evolved into. Anyway, cerebral, intellectual, idealistic may describe Roddenberry's writing. His next credited story was Charlie X, which is the second episode aired in the series. Charlie X was about what happens to a person who gets godlike powers and how power corrupts. And it's a pretty decent episode in my opinion. The premise was interesting, and what Charlie did to those who crossed him was actually pretty horrific. The scene when he removed people's faces was one of the scariest images of my childhood. The next Roddenberry episode introduces my absolute favorite Star Trek villain, Harcourt Fenton Mudd, in Mudd's Women. It's about a drug that can make any woman desirable and sexy, which is exploited by Harry Mudd as he turns ugly women into beauties and sells them as wives to wealthy miners. And it also kind of betrayed Roddenberry's ingrained sexism, which is ironic insofar that he had initially imagined a woman as the first officer. By the way, in this club called the Oasis in San Francisco, I saw a drag king show that performed this episode, Mudd's Women, and they made it hilarious because it made fun of the outdated views of women. The next Roddenberry episode was The Return of the Archons, about a society run by a computer which removed any sort of creativity from that society because of the computer's harsh regulations. It also is probably the inspiration for the Purge movies because it also mandates periods of violence. Definitely it's not one of my favorite episodes, but not one of the worst ones either. Roddenberry didn't have another writing credit until the end of the second season with Bread and Circuses, which was co-created with Gene Roddenberry, who I'll talk about in another video if I continue with this series. By the way, if you want to see more of these, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel. Anyway, Bread and Circuses. It's about a human society stuck in the Roman era, even though they have 20th century technology, which is a plot device picked up in other episodes, and it's a popular what-if science fiction trope. Other episodes by other Star Trek writers that mined this trope included What If Nazis Still Controlled Society, or my favorite, What If Society Formed Around Chicago Gangsters and Mobs. I actually really liked Bread and Circuses, especially when I was young, but the ending about the Son of God kind of now puts me off. After filming this video, I realized I skipped another Season 2 episode written by Gene Roddenberry, which may be some sort of subconscious slip on my part. I don't know. Anyway, the episode is called The Omega Glory, which actually aired before Bread and Circuses. Again, this is a what-if trope that posits what if a nuclear war in the 20th century reverted civilization back to the Stone Age. A renegade starship captain, Captain Tracy of the starship Exeter, is stranded on planet Omega 4 among the natives, who have fractured into two tribes, the Yangs and the Cones. Captain Tracy breaks a prime directive and uses technology to help the Cones and believes there is a fountain of youth on the planet since the natives live hundreds of years. The landing party and Captain Tracy allegedly cannot leave the planet because a disease would kill everyone on the Enterprise, which is what happened to the Exeter crew, Captain Tracy's ship. Anyway, in the end, Kirk discovers that this planet is another parallel Earth. And Yangs are short for Yankees, and Cones is short for communists.
Yangs? Yanks? Spock? Yankees.
Cones. Communists. Parallel is almost too close, Captain. It would mean they fought the war your Earth avoided. And in this case, the Asiatics won and took over this planet.
He finds the holy words of the Yangs to be a garbled form of the Declaration of Independence. In the end, McCoy discovers the cure for the disease and also discovers that the long lifespans of the natives is due to evolutionary biology and not something that can be bottled like Captain Tracy thought. You know, one thing that always kind of annoyed me in this episode is that Captain Tracy has this weird emblem on his shirt rather than the normal Federation symbol. This is by far the most patriotic American episode in the entire series, and as an Asian kid growing up, I found it a little off-putting that the yellow cones, those damn communists, were all Asian, and the white Yangs, the good old boys, were all Caucasian, living like Aboriginal Americans.
The yellow civilization is almost destroyed. The white civilization is destroyed.
I also didn't like that Spock's face was likened to that of the devil. I don't think this episode really holds up today and is probably my least favorite of the Roddenberry episodes. Even though some of his other episodes may be more problematic, it doesn't have any of the humor or camp to redeem it that those other episodes may have had. That said, the biological aspects of the plot were kind of interesting, and we do get a stereotypical red shirt as cannon fodder. Also, Sulu is third in command here, which makes more sense than earlier episodes when it was Scotty, the chief engineer, who took control when Spock and Kirk weren't around. Oh, and we do get some really bad wigs. Another Season 2 episode that Roddenberry co-developed with Art Wallace is Assignment Earth, which was meant to be a spin-off for a new series Roddenberry was creating. Here, the Enterprise travels back in time to the 20th century and meets a man named Gary 7, trained by an alien species with advanced technology, and he was some sort of secret agent man, protector of the Earth. And his secretary is played by one of my favorite actresses, Kerry Garr. It's an odd episode because the focus is on Gary 7 rather than the Enterprise crew. Nonetheless, I'm kind of sorry that the series wasn't picked up because I thought it had potential. The next Roddenberry episode was The Savage Curtain, which aired during Season 3 and puts Roddenberry's idealism on display. A powerful alien species wants to test which human philosophy is more powerful, good or evil. And the aliens create these replicated beings from the past, including Abraham Lincoln. Now, even as a kid, I thought this was a hokey storyline, though it was fun seeing Sarek, the Vulcan philosopher, and Kahless, the Klingon warlord. The last Gene Roddenberry episode is also the last episode of the third season, meaning it is the last episode of the entire series. Unfortunately, it is also one of the worst episodes, arguably the worst episode of the entire series. It is called Turnabout Intruder, and it's the episode that is universally ignored by every other Star Trek series in the franchise because it tries to establish that the Federation does not allow women to be effective Starfleet captains. Yeah. Now, since Roddenberry initially wanted a woman to play the first officer, you might think that maybe this would be an allegory about equal rights, but you would be wrong. So wrong. The story is about Janice Lester, who is jealous that Kirk is a starship captain and she can't be because she's a woman, and so she trades bodies with him using alien technology. Rather than being a parable about how women are equal to men and should be captains, the episode seems to prove that women are too emotional to make good starship captains. It is simply a horrible episode on so many levels. That said, it was kind of amusing to see William Shatner, again the hammiest actor alive, portraying what he saw were female mannerisms. So yeah, it was kind of pure camp. So camp, in fact, the Drag King troupe I was talking about from the Oasis in San Francisco made it into a hilarious farce.
Report for an examination. What? On what basis? Development of emotional instability and erratic mental attitudes. Mood swings. Irritability. Hysteria. Hot flashes. Feeling not so fresh. Damage Starfleet be the judge of my motives.
I will not submit to any search for revenge.
But you will submit to Starfleet regulations.
So, those are all the episodes that Gene Roddenberry, the visionary creator of Star Trek, is credited as the writer. Let me know in the comments which of these episodes were your favorite. For me, it's probably Mudd's Women, because Harry Mudd is such a lovable rascal. I know. Also, let me know in the comments if you want to see more of these videos on Star Trek, the original series. There's only a couple of writers who did more than one episode, but some of them are science fiction legends like Harlan Ellison and Theodore Sturgeon. Well, folks, all I can say is live long and prosper, and until we meet again, may all the books you read be blessed.